In what year did you start playing video games? If it was around late 90s or early aughts, we might agree on one thing. Games used to be a lot more wild back then, in a way that only indie developers can afford to be these days. The introduction and rapid evolution of 3D graphics meant that everyone was not only figuring out just what video games are, but what can even be done with them. The booming growth of the gaming industry also had people clamoring for the piece of the pie, which gave us some of the most unexpected collaborations and tie-ins. I'm talking stuff like Aeon Flux game, Bad Boys, Evangelion, Heavy Metal, Die Hard. We even got some actually decent Chronicles of Riddick games. And those are just tie-ins and adaptations, games based on existing movies, anime, comics, and on occasion books. There was a whole different field of games where the entire premise revolved around a famous band or person being involved, like the classic Shaq Fu Michael Jackson game, Wu-Tang Shaolin Style, or even Mark Echo's Getting Up. Today we're going to talk about one such game, Def Jam Fight for New York. Not the first and not the last game in the series, but it's by far the best one. So let's see what it was about and why a game like this could not be made in 2024. And if you end up enjoying the video, we would very much appreciate a follow or even a simple comment. Thank you. Even with all that in mind, the original Def Jam Vendetta was still a crazy case that nobody expected to happen. It all started with Aki Corporation, now known as Sin Sofia, making yet another WCW game. Even though they excelled at making wrestling games, this one was on the verge of getting cancelled, so EA had to call in Daryl Anselmo and Josh Holmes, who previously not merely salvaged but turned NBA Street into a massive hit that people love to this day. The previous idea of some sort of alien wrestling game was abandoned in favor of rappers fighting each other. This direction might seem fine to most of you, but it was not at all the case for the executives. Anselmo and Holmes had to explain the whole culture of rap and hip-hop to get the idea greenlit. You know, stuff like diss tracks, personal beefs, regional rivalries, and the highly competitive nature of rappers in general. Everyone was trying to outdo their peers in just about every possible way. After that was done, they only had the easy stuff left, like going back and forth between US and Japan, as well as convincing music brands along with their artists to provide their voice, likeness, and music for a game where they will be brutally beaten up by their peers.
Man, what the fuck is you talking about?
What the fuck was that?
I'm sorry, man. I wasn't thinking about it when I did it.
Somehow they pulled it off. It wasn't quite on the level of NBA Street in terms of success, but it still got mostly positive reviews and decent sales, which allowed them to make a sequel that would be bigger and better. A sequel that was destined to become a classic. While the unique premise made Def Jam Vendetta more fun, fundamentally it was still an Aki engine wrestling game, one that played all too similar to WWE No Mercy, which released a few years prior. They knew that if they were to make a sequel, the gimmick would no longer be enough. Instead of keeping things simple, the ambition was cranked up to 11. The roster alone ballooned to 67 fighters. Some are original characters, but majority consists of real rappers and hip-hop artists, including Exhibit, Snoop Dogg, Mobb Deep, Ghostface Killah, Ice-T, and Flavor Flav. The gameplay was almost completely overhauled. They wanted to make sure that this is a sequel that expands both the game and the audience, instead of narrowing down the focus only around the hardcore players. For the combat system, it meant introducing 5 new fighting styles, divided into kickboxing, wrestling, martial arts, street fighting, and submissions, all with their unique movesets and ways of knocking out opponents. That alone could have been enough, but they went a step further and allowed you to make your own custom character. After picking out their looks, you could also decide how they would fight, by mixing up to 3 of the game's 5 fighting styles, which in some cases unlocks unique combinations like Muay Thai or drunken boxing. Just as with the previous game, all of that could be upgraded, and this time around, your looks also had a direct impact on the gameplay. The more you win, the more cash you earn, which means you can get new jewelry, clothes, and tattoos. Doing that will increase your charisma, which in this game grants you faster meter gain. Finally, the story mode was now a lot more fleshed out. It technically continues from the previous game, but it's entirely self-contained and the previous plot doesn't really matter. Though, that being said, the narrative of Fight for New York is also by far the least ambitious part of the game. The whole time you're just going from one fight club to another to beat people up, which sort of acts as conquering or retaking turf. Though the point is arguably not the story, but rather the characters within that story. It's easy to ignore predictable plot points when you have Snoop Dogg swooping in with his gang just to talk shit about you.
Forget it, Crow. A deal's a deal. Now give me my girl.
Whoa.
You better check yourself right there, bitch. You in no position to be making demands.
And for most of the game, you will be working for D-Mob, who, depending on your age, will either remind you of God of War or Stargate.
Indeed.
It also helps that the repetitive tasks were made a lot more engaging thanks to the combination of over-the-top combat, energetic music, challenging AI, and EA doing as much as they could to represent the personalities of all the fighters. They even had the rappers suggest their own finishers, or blazing moves as the game calls them. Some were so outrageous that they didn't make the cut, but the final result is still fantastic. It's almost like a middle point between signature wrestling moves and Mortal Kombat fatalities. All of the above is why Def Jam became such a classic. It's not just a game where rappers beat each other up, it's a full-ass package that doesn't leave much to be desired. It's an exceptionally wild but also very competent game that we will never see again. First of all, let's acknowledge that it did get a sequel some years later called Def Jam Icon, and it was terrible. It was made by a different company, and almost everything that people liked about the previous games was missing. The music is still there, they had some really cool reactive stages that would quake to the beats and strikes, but the gameplay was capital B bad, and the spirit was completely gone. At this point, the return to form is impossible for many reasons. First of all, a game like this but with contemporary rappers would be much harder to take seriously. The general vibes and culture are almost entirely different than they used to be, especially when it comes to the highest echelons of the industry. But the biggest problem by far is money. It only cost them $15 million to make Fight for New York. These days, getting likeness, voice approval, and music from just one top artist might cost them a lot more than that. And that's not even going into the messy bureaucracy of music licensing. The latter is so convoluted that even trying to bring back old games would require deals and permissions from too many companies. At this point, the only hope for people who want more Def Jam is a spiritual successor that abandons real names and licensed music, which in itself sort of defeats the point. You can replicate the gameplay, you can replicate the aesthetics, you can make a similar soundtrack, but you can never make a game like this ever again. As always, thank you to those who watched all the way to the end. Goodbye and have a nice day.